The freighter shuddered under the impact of the Kravelin plasma bolts, its shields sputtering as they absorbed the brunt of the attack. General Dale Sutherland sat quietly in the dimly lit corner of the cargo hold, his hands resting on his knees, his expression calm. Around him, the crew scurried in frantic disarray, their voices rising in panic as the alien boarding pods clamped onto the hull. He had seen this scenario play out 100 times in his mind and a dozen times in real life. Chaos had a predictable rhythm if one knew how to listen. A young crew member stumbled into him, a wiry boy with wide, fearful eyes. "They're breaking through. We're done for," he exclaimed, his voice cracking. Dale looked up, his steel-gray eyes locking onto the boy's. "Calm yourself. Panic is the enemy's greatest ally," he said, his voice low but commanding. The boy hesitated, visibly steadied by the presence of someone who seemed utterly unshaken by the situation. The sound of metal shrieking under pressure reverberated through the hold as the Kravelin breached the ship. Their harsh, guttural commands echoed down the corridors, their heavy footfalls announcing their arrival. Dale stood slowly, his movements deliberate, almost languid. He wasn't here to fight, not yet. He was here to be taken. The first Kravelin warrior stormed into the cargo hold, a towering figure clad in sleek, insectoid armor. Its compound eyes swept the room, taking in the cowering crew. Its mandibles clicked in what Dale recognized as amusement. The Kravelin thrived on fear. "Humans," the creature hissed, its voice a grating blend of arrogance and contempt. "Pathetic, weak, and predictable. This vessel now belongs to the Kravelin Dominion." Dale stepped forward, drawing the alien's attention. "Spare them," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "I am the captain of this vessel. I take full responsibility for its cargo and crew." The Kravelin tilted its head, studying him. "You are no captain," it sneered. "You reek of something more." Dale didn't flinch under the creature's scrutiny. "Then take me and let them go. I am all you need." A tense silence hung in the air as the Kravelin warrior considered the offer. Then, with a dismissive gesture, it barked an order to its subordinates. Dale was seized roughly, his arms pinned behind him as they dragged him toward the boarding pod. He offered no resistance, his gaze steady and unreadable. As the pod detached from the freighter and began its journey back to the Kravelin vessel, Dale allowed himself a brief glance at his captors. They were arrogant, confident in their superiority, and utterly blind to the trap they had just walked into. The Kravelin ship was a masterpiece of alien engineering, its corridors illuminated by an eerie green glow that seemed to pulse with the ship's heartbeat. Dale was marched through its labyrinthine halls, the alien guards jabbing him with the blunt ends of their weapons whenever they felt he was moving too slowly. They brought him before Commander Zarvek, the officer in charge of the sector. Zarvek was smaller than the warriors, but exuded an air of authority that was palpable. His exoskeleton was adorned with intricate carvings, a sign of rank and countless victories. "You are an odd prize," Zarvek said, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Too calm for a human trader, too composed for a common soldier. Who are you?" Dale met his gaze without flinching. "Just an old man trying to survive." Zarvek leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "I do not believe you, but that is of no consequence. You will speak the truth in time, or you will die." Dale smiled faintly, a gesture that seemed to unsettle the commander. "We all die eventually." Frustrated by the human's defiance, Zarvek ordered his guards to take Dale to the detention block. The cell was stark and cold, its walls pulsating faintly with the same green light that filled the ship. Dale sat on the hard bench, his posture relaxed as if he were meditating rather than imprisoned. The guards watched him warily from outside the cell. One of them muttered something in their guttural tongue, glancing nervously at the human. Dale caught the tone, even if he didn't understand the words. They were uneasy. Good. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time had a way of bending in places like this. Dale observed everything. The shift changes of the guards, the faint hum of the ship's systems, the subtle vibrations that hinted at its engines. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle, and Dale was a man who thrived on puzzles. When Zarvek returned, it was with a renewed determination. "You are no ordinary human," he said, pacing in front of the cell. "I will find out who you are and why you were on that ship." "You're welcome to try," Dale replied evenly. Zarvek's frustration boiled over, and he stormed out, leaving Dale alone once more. As soon as the commander was gone, Dale allowed a small, satisfied smile to play across his lips. They were taking the bait, just as he had planned. The guards were growing lax, their initial caution giving way to routine. It was a small but significant shift, and Dale knew how to exploit it. He began engaging them in conversation, subtly probing for information. A young guard, barely out of training, was the first to crack, revealing in a moment of arrogance that the Kravelin fleet's command base was hidden in a nebula far from the prying eyes of their enemies. Dale stored the information away, his mind already working on how to use it. The mission was going better than he had hoped. Now all that remained was the hardest part, getting out alive. As he leaned back against the cold wall of his cell, Dale allowed himself a moment of reflection. The Kravelin thought they had captured an old man, a relic of humanity's past. What they didn't realize was that they had invited a wolf into their den. The stage was set, and the pieces were in motion. Dale Sutherland was no stranger to impossible odds. This time would be no different. Zarvek stood in the shadowed chamber, his mandibles twitching in irritation. Before him, a holographic projection shimmered, displaying a report from Kravelin intelligence. The document had been flagged with the highest level of urgency, and as the details scrolled past, Zarvek's irritation morphed into disbelief. "General Dale Sutherland," he muttered, his voice barely above a growl. The name lingered in the air like a ghost. The aide standing beside him, a younger Kravelin named Threx, shifted uneasily. He was believed to have retired after the last conflict with humanity, Threx said, his voice tinged with nervousness. "The humans have been quiet since then. We never anticipated." "Silence!" Zarvek barked, his tone sharp enough to make Threx flinch. "This is no mere relic. This is the architect of humanity's greatest victories. And we have him here, in chains, aboard my ship." For a moment, Zarvek considered the implications. Capturing Sutherland could be a triumph, a strategic advantage the Dominion could wield against humanity. Yet an unshakable unease gnawed at him. Men like Dale Sutherland were never captured by accident. In the detention block, Dale sat cross-legged on the cold floor, his eyes closed as if in meditation. The faint hum of the ship was a constant companion, a rhythmic pulse that he had come to understand intimately. He knew Zarvek had uncovered his identity by now. That was inevitable. When Zarvek entered the cell, he did so with a deliberate slowness, his armored boots clicking against the floor. Behind him, 2 guards stood at attention, their weapons trained on Dale. The general opened his eyes and regarded his captor with calm curiosity. "So," Zarvek began, his voice measured, "you're not the simple traitor you pretended to be. Dale Sutherland, a name that resonates across the galaxy, even among my kind." Dale didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if appraising Zarvek. "I take it you've done your homework," he said finally, his voice steady and devoid of fear. Zarvek stepped closer, his mandibles clicking softly. "You're a dangerous man, General. Too dangerous to be allowed to roam free. What I fail to understand is how a legend like you ends up in such a vulnerable position. Were you careless? Or is there more to this?" Dale smiled faintly, the kind of smile that unnerved even the most battle-hardened opponents. "You're smarter than you look," he said, "but not nearly smart enough." The taunt hit its mark, and Zarvek's composure cracked for a brief moment. "You will tell me why you are here," he hissed, leaning closer, "or I will ensure your stay becomes unpleasant." Dale held Zarvek's gaze, unflinching. "You've already made your first mistake," he said, underestimating me. Frustrated, Zarvek straightened and gestured to his guards. "Bring him to the interrogation chamber." I will extract the truth myself. As they dragged Dale from the cell, he allowed himself to be led without resistance, his mind already calculating the next steps. Every moment spent with Zarvek was an opportunity to gather intelligence, to exploit weaknesses. The interrogation chamber was as stark and intimidating as one would expect. Its walls were lined with ominous machinery, each piece designed to break the will of even the strongest prisoners. Dale was strapped into a metal chair, the restraints digging into his wrists. Zarvek loomed over him, his mandibles clicking rhythmically. "You are not here by accident," Zarvek said, pacing slowly. "Men like you don't stumble into Kravlan space without a reason. What are you planning?" Dale didn't answer. Instead, he studied Zarvek's movements, his tone, the subtle inflections in his voice. He was learning more about his captor with each passing second. "You think your silence protects you?" Zarvek sneered. "It will only make this more painful." As Zarvek activated one of the machines, a surge of energy coursed through Dale's body, sharp and searing. He gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out. Pain was an old companion, one he had learned to master long ago. "I've endured worse," Dale said through clenched teeth, his voice laced with defiance. Zarvek's frustration grew, but he masked it with a cruel smile. "You are resilient, I'll give you that. But even the strongest will break eventually." The interrogation continued, a relentless barrage of questions and calculated pain. Dale endured it all, giving nothing away. He knew the longer Zarvek focused on him, the less attention would be paid to the broader implications of his capture. Then a breakthrough came, but not from Dale. One of the guards entered the chamber, whispering urgently into Zarvek's ear. The commander's eyes narrowed as he processed the information. "Interesting," Zarvek said, turning back to Dale. "It seems your presence here has caused quite a stir among your people. A distress signal was intercepted, one that originated from your freighter just before our arrival. It appears your capture was anticipated." Dale allowed a small smirk to form. "You're sharper than I gave you credit for," he said. "But you're still playing catch-up." The revelation unsettled Zarvek. If Dale's capture had been orchestrated, then what else had the human planned? Zarvek ordered Dale to be returned to his cell, his mind racing with possibilities. As the guards escorted him out, Dale couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Back in the detention block, Dale resumed his meditation, his body aching but his mind sharper than ever. The Kravlan were beginning to realize the depth of the trap they had walked into, but it was too late. He had already learned what he needed, the location of the Kravlan Fleet's command base. The young guard from earlier, Lieutenant Cross, approached the cell hesitantly. Dale noticed a slight tremor in the alien's hands, the uncertainty in his posture. "You're not what I expected," Cross said, his voice low. "Few things are," Dale replied. "But the real question is, what do you expect to gain from this war?" Cross hesitated, clearly conflicted. "The Dominion offers security, order," he said, but there was no conviction in his tone. Dale leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "At what cost? Do you truly believe this is your fight, or are you just following orders?" Cross didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Dale had seen this before, the seeds of doubt in a soldier who began to question their purpose. It was a subtle victory, but a significant one. As Cross turned and walked away, Dale leaned back against the cold wall of his cell. The pieces were falling into place, and the game was far from over. Zarvek and his crew were beginning to unravel, their confidence shaken. The next move was his, and Dale Sutherland never played to lose. In the dim confines of his cell, Dale Sutherland ran his fingers along the edge of the metal cot, feeling for imperfections. His calm demeanor masked the storm of calculations racing through his mind. Each detail of the Kravlan ship, the rhythmic hum of its engines, the patrol intervals of the guards, even the faint, irregular flicker of the lights, was a puzzle piece fitting into his plan. When the door hissed open, Dale looked up to see Lieutenant Cross standing there again. The young guard hesitated, clutching his weapon tightly, though the human made no threatening move. "I don't know why I'm here," Cross admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Dale leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Because you've begun to see the cracks," he said. "You don't want to fight for something you don't believe in. And now, you're wondering if there's a way out." Cross stiffened but didn't deny it. He glanced over his shoulder, ensuring no one else was near. "Even if I wanted to, they'd know. Zarvek would never let me live." "Zarvek's grip isn't as strong as he pretends," Dale replied. "Your kind has a saying, doesn't it? A brittle blade cuts itself. That's what the Dominion is, a brittle blade. It looks sharp, but under pressure, it snaps." Cross's mandibles twitched, the truth of Dale's words unsettling him. "What do you want from me?" Dale leaned back, his voice calm yet commanding. "Access to the ship system, schematics, anything you can give me. I need to know how this vessel operates." The lieutenant hesitated, fear warring with his growing doubt. Finally, he nodded. "I'll see what I can do." Hours later, as Dale waited, he reviewed his mental map of the ship. The layout was slowly taking shape in his mind. Engine rooms, security hubs, escape pods. Cross returned quietly, slipping a small data pad through the energy barrier of the cell. "This is everything I could pull from the terminals without raising suspicion," Cross said, his voice low. "If they catch me—" "They won't," Dale interrupted, his tone firm. "You've already done more than most would. Now follow my instructions carefully, and we'll both get out of this alive." As Cross left, Dale studied the data pad, absorbing the ship's schematics. The Kravlin's engineering was sophisticated, but it wasn't flawless. There were vulnerabilities: an access tunnel near the detention block, a maintenance hatch leading to the engine room. With careful timing, those vulnerabilities could become their escape route. The next phase of his plan required precision. Dale began gathering the few resources available to him. A hidden metal shard from the cot, a strip of fabric torn from his uniform. Tools were improvised in the military, and he had honed that skill to perfection. 2 nights later, the opportunity came. The guards on the night shift were less vigilant, their patrols predictable. Dale waited until the footsteps faded into the distance, then activated the small device Cross had smuggled into his cell. A signal disruptor that temporarily disabled the energy field. He slipped through the barrier and into the shadows of the corridor, moving with practiced stealth. The maintenance tunnel Cross had indicated was just ahead, covered by a grating. Dale crouched and removed it quietly, his improvised tools working faster than he had anticipated. Sliding into the cramped tunnel, he began his descent toward the engine room. The air was hot and filled with the faint scent of burning coolant, a sign that the engines were running at full capacity. Every sound was amplified in the confined space, forcing Dale to move with utmost care. Reaching the engine room, he found it guarded by 2 Kravlin soldiers. Their backs were turned as they monitored the machinery, oblivious to the human creeping through the overhead ducts. Dale dropped silently behind them, his movements swift and deliberate. Before the first guard could react, Dale had incapacitated him with a precise blow to the neck. The second guard spun around, raising his weapon, but Dale was faster, disarming him and delivering a strike that rendered him unconscious. With the guards neutralized, Dale approached the central console. The Kravlin systems were alien, yet strangely intuitive, their reliance on centralized control a glaring weakness. He began inputting commands, initiating a series of malfunctions designed to distract the crew and redirect their attention. By the time alarms began blaring throughout the ship, Dale was already on the move again, retracing his path to the detention block. Cross was waiting there, his expression a mix of fear and determination. "You've started a chain reaction," Cross said, his voice trembling. "That's the idea," Dale replied. "The crew will be too busy dealing with the false alarms to focus on us." Together, they navigated the corridors, their route carefully chosen to avoid patrols. The ship's internal chaos worked to their advantage, with Kravlin soldiers rushing in the opposite direction, unaware of the escape unfolding under their noses. Reaching the escape pods, Dale quickly assessed the situation. The pods were equipped with tracking systems, a precaution the Kravlin had implemented to prevent prisoners from vanishing without a trace. "We can't just launch," Cross said, his panic rising. "They'll find us immediately." Dale placed a reassuring hand on the alien's shoulder. "That's why we're not going alone. The Dominion's own systems will cover our tracks." He accessed the pod's terminal, using the data Cross had provided to reroute the tracking signal. Instead of broadcasting their location, the pod would send a decoy signal, leading the Kravlin on a wild chase across uninhabited space. The pod's hatch opened with a hiss, and Dale gestured for Cross to climb in. "Trust me," he said. "This is only the beginning." As the pod launched, Dale watched the stars blur into streaks of light. The Kravlin ship receded into the distance, its alarm still wailing. Dale allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The escape was successful, but the mission wasn't over. The secrets he had uncovered aboard the ship, the location of the Dominion's command base, the structural weaknesses of their fleet, were invaluable. Dale leaned back in his seat, his mind already turning to the next steps. The Dominion had underestimated him, and now they would pay the price. Beside him, Cross sat in silence, his expression unreadable. Dale glanced at him, recognizing the uncertainty in the young alien's eyes. "You made the right choice," he said, "but there's no turning back now." Cross nodded slowly, the weight of his decision sinking in. "What happens next?" he asked. Dale's gaze hardened, his voice resolute. "We take the fight to them." The stars above the barren moon glimmered coldly as Dale Sutherland stepped out of the stolen escape pod, his boots crunching against the frosted surface. Beside him, Cross fumbled with a portable scanner, his hands trembling under the weight of the moment. The coordinates pulled from the Kravlin ship's database had brought them here, an unassuming moon concealing the Dominion's hidden command base. "Are you certain about this?" Cross asked, his mandibles twitching with anxiety. "Certain enough," Dale replied, scanning the horizon. His voice was steady, but his mind raced with calculations. The base's defenses would be formidable, but his plan relied on one thing above all, the Kravlin's overconfidence. They advanced cautiously, keeping to the shadows of jagged rock formations. Cross's scanner emitted a faint ping, indicating a massive energy source buried beneath the surface. "There's a shield generator nearby," Cross whispered. "We'll need to disable it to access the main base." Dale nodded, his focus sharpening. "Stay low. Follow my lead." The shield generator's location was marked by a faint shimmer in the air, a distortion that betrayed its cloaking field. 2 Kravlin guards stood watch, their elongated forms silhouetted against a faint glow. Dale assessed the situation quickly, noting their positions and the limited visibility in the moon's dim light. He motioned for Cross to stay back, then moved silently toward the guards. His training took over, every step calculated and deliberate. In a fluid motion, he dispatched the first guard with a precise strike, catching the second before he could react. The encounter lasted mere seconds, and the area was silent once more. Cross approached hesitantly, his eyes wide. "How do you move like that?" he asked, a mix of awe and unease in his voice. "Years of practice," Dale replied tersely, already examining the generator's control panel. The technology was alien but not incomprehensible, and he began overriding the system with practiced efficiency. As the shield generator powered down, a deep rumble resonated through the ground. Dale looked up to see the base's concealed entrance sliding open, revealing a vast, fortified structure carved into the moon's surface. "They'll know something's wrong," Cross said, his voice taut with fear. "Good," Dale said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Let them scramble. It'll make them predictable." The pair descended into the base, the air growing warmer and heavier as they moved deeper underground. Dale's stolen data had revealed the layout. A sprawling labyrinth of corridors and control rooms, all centered around the Dominion's command nexus. As they approached the heart of the base, the resistance intensified. Patrols moved through the halls with increasing frequency, forcing Dale, and Cross to rely on stealth and quick thinking. At one point, they slipped into a maintenance duct to avoid detection, their breathing shallow as alien voices echoed nearby. "Why are you doing this?" Cross asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the duct's ventilation. "For the same reason you helped me," Dale replied without hesitation. "To expose the lies holding this empire together and to give everyone else a chance to fight back." Cross stared at him for a moment before nodding, the last of his hesitation fading. When they emerged from the duct, they found themselves in a control room overlooking the Nexus. The central chamber was a hive of activity, with Kravlan officers coordinating fleet movements and monitoring galactic communications. At the center of it all stood Zarvek, the Dominion's High Commander, his presence as imposing as ever. "Do you have a plan for that?" Cross asked, nodding toward Zarvek. "Of course," Dale said, already scanning the room for vulnerabilities. He spotted a control console on the far side, its display indicating access to the base's power systems. "I need you to create a distraction," he told Cross. Something loud enough to pull their attention, but not too obvious. Cross hesitated, then nodded. "I'll figure something out." As Cross moved off, Dale slipped into the shadows, navigating the perimeter of the room. He reached the console just as alarms began blaring. Cross's handiwork. The distraction was effective, drawing guards and officers away from their posts. Dale worked quickly, bypassing the console's security protocols and inputting a series of commands. The base's power grid flickered, then surged, causing the lighting to dim and equipment to malfunction. In the chaos, Dale made his way toward Zarvek. The High Commander barked orders, his voice cutting through the noise, but his attention was focused on restoring order, not on the human closing in on him. When Dale struck, it was swift and decisive. Zarvek barely had time to react before Dale had him in a chokehold, his weapon pressed against the alien's temple. The room fell silent as the remaining officers turned to see their leader held captive. "Shut it all down," Dale ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "Communications, defenses, everything." Zarvek's mandibles clicked in defiance, but the look in Dale's eyes left no room for argument. Reluctantly, the High Commander gestured for his officers to comply. One by one, the base's systems powered down, leaving the facility vulnerable. "You think this changes anything?" Zarvek hissed. "The Dominion will crush you like the vermin you are." Dale leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "The Dominion's reign ends today, and you'll live just long enough to see it fall." With Zarvek secured, Dale activated his communicator, sending a signal to Allied forces waiting just beyond the system's edge. Within minutes, human ships emerged from hyperspace, their weapons trained on the now defenseless base. Explosions rocked the facility as targeted strikes disabled key structures, ensuring the Dominion's secrets couldn't be salvaged. Dale and Cross made their way to the surface, where a dropship awaited to extract them. As they ascended, Dale looked out at the devastation below. The base was in ruins, its once imposing presence reduced to smoldering rubble. But the mission was only the beginning. Turning to Cross, Dale said, "This is the first strike. The rest of the galaxy needs to see what's possible when we fight back." Cross nodded, his resolve now as strong as Dale's. Together, they disappeared into the stars, ready to ignite the flames of rebellion.